have another confession. The episode before last, I talked about how anticipating my partner's response, my husband, and then taking out my children. And I realized I needed to continue the conversation because something I experienced called alexithymia is part of that mix too, and we're going to get into it. Because, sometimes I have become an ugly green goblin towards my children. My apologies, babies. And not, in a metaphorically cute way. Not, haha, mom is tired. I can feel myself becoming this version of myself that I genuinely do not like. My tone changes, my patience evaporates. Something that under normal circumstances, I probably wouldn't care about suddenly becomes a thing. And I've been asking myself, why am I so angry? Sometimes also question why I even gave my children the remote to my triggers in the first place. But other than that, what's really weird about that is that half the time I'm not actually angry at my children at all. I'm angry at what I think is about to happen next, some story I've made up in my mind. And that distinction has taken me a while to see. Hence, where we are, part 2 with the conversation. Welcome back to Grounded and in Full Color, a neurodivergent mom's studio for motherhood, overstimulation, and building a life that actually fits your brain. I'm your host, Princess Ebony, who experiences autism and an ADHD brain as a mom of 3 and your favorite neurodivergent big sister on the internet. The thing they're doing isn't always the thing I'm responding to. Here's the pattern. My children are doing something. Maybe they're being loud. Maybe they're making a mess, which I've learned and I wonderfully accept is a sign of healthy children, a healthy environment, more than adequate parenting. Maybe they're asking for something too. Maybe they're doing something that objectively is completely normal for children. And something in me goes, here we go. And suddenly I'm irritated, sharp, negative, controlling, maybe even rude. Again, my apology, babies. But if I slow the whole thing down, and I'm getting better at doing this, by the way, I can sometimes see that my brain has already skipped ahead. I'm not just seeing child does thing. I'm seeing child does thing. Husband notices, husband reacts, I deal with his reaction, this becomes a problem for me. And by the time my husband has actually said or done anything, I've already reacted. I've already activated, like it's an anti-superpower. I've already been carrying the emotional weight of an argument that hasn't technically happened yet. It's just been living up in my head. And that's the part that really got me. Because sometimes I'm not parenting my children. I'm preparing for my husband's response to my children's behavior. And those are 2 very different jobs. The imaginary conversation that happens before the real one. I can have an entire interaction with my husband in my head before we've exchanged a single word and before you tell me, yes, I have heard sets from stand-up comedic sketches, joke about this. I know what he's going to say. I know how he's going to say it. I know what he's going to think. I know I'm going to have to explain. I know how frustrated I'm going to become. I know how I'm going to feel misunderstood. And sometimes I'm responding to all of that before any of it has actually happened. It's anticipation. It's bracing. It's the constant little, what's he going to say? Is he going to be upset? Is this going to become my problem? Am I going to have to defend myself? Am I going to have to explain the children? Am I going to have to explain myself? And suddenly my child's completely ordinary behavior is getting caught in the crossfire. That is not fair to them. And honestly, it's not fair to me either. It's like practicing this negative self-talk and then I'm not surprised, when it actually manifests itself in my reality because I'm living through conversations that haven't happened yet. And I guess that's what brings them into my reality in the first place. Or is it the second place? And usually there's a reason I'm anticipating it. I don't want to paint this as poor me, I'm imagining everything, because sometimes my anticipation is based on experience. Sometimes my husband really does react. Sometimes the thing I'm actually anticipating happens. Sometimes I've learned a pattern because the pattern exists or it has existed in the past. Even just one instance and I'm like, this paints the whole world ahead. That is something I'm working on as well. So my nervous system isn't necessarily hallucinating the possibility. It's trying to predict what comes next. That's what nervous systems do. They learn, they notice, they create associations, all in an effort to keep us safe. And if something has happened enough times, your brain can start treating the possibility of it happening again as information. The problem is that prediction can become pre-reaction. And then I'm no longer responding to the present moment. I'm responding to the anticipated future. And this is where my children get the worst version of the reaction. This is the part I don't love admitting, but if I weren't carrying all of that anticipation and anxiety about how my husband might react, I would probably respond to my children based on how I actually feel about what they're doing. And most of the time, I don't care that much. They're children. They're going to make noise. They're going to spill things. They're going to interrupt me. They're going to have emotions. They're going to ask me the same question 17 and a half times. They're going to do things that make absolutely no sense to me. That's childhood, and it's beautifully, wonderfully messy and imperfect. And usually when I'm regulated, I can look at something and think, like all of that. Okay, that's annoying. Well, let's handle it. Or that's not a big deal. But when I'm anticipating my husband's reaction, suddenly it's, stop, don't do that. Why are you doing that? We just talked about this. Didn't I just tell you? And the emotional intensity doesn't match the actual event. That's the clue. When the reaction is enormous compared to the thing happening in front of me, there's probably more happening underneath it too. I think some of my anger at my husband has been hiding inside my parenting. The realization, this one was very uncomfortable because I've spent a lot of time thinking, I'm frustrated with the children. But when I trace it backward, sometimes I'm frustrated with my husband. Sometimes I'm frustrated about something that happened earlier. Sometimes I'm frustrated because I'm anticipating something that hasn't happened yet. Sometimes I'm angry about how I think something is going to happen. Sometimes I'm angry because I feel like I'm going to have to carry something. And instead of that emotion going where it belongs, which is probably in a journal to be processed and letting me know that I need to work on my communication and speaking up in our marriage, in our partnership, in our relationship, it gets redirected toward the nearest tiny human who did not, in fact, sign up to be my emotional lightning rod. That's the ugly part, because children are incredibly convenient targets for displaced frustration. They're there, they're loud, they're asking things, they're already doing something, and unlike an adult partner, they can't simply leave the room and go make a sandwich. So I'm not careful. They become the place where all of the emotional pressure comes out, if I'm not careful. And I don't want that. Then there's alexithymia that I mentioned in the very beginning. And this is where things get particularly interesting for moi, because I experience alexithymia. Alexithymia is basically difficulty identifying, distinguishing, or putting words to your own emotions. It's not the same thing as not having emotions. I have plenty of emotions. My authority lies in my sacral center. Sometimes, apparently, I have enough emotions for an entire small municipality. How do you say that? Is that the right word I want to use? Municipality. Municipality. Is that word? I probably should have come up with a different word. But I believe you understand what I'm going with this. The problem is that I don't always know what I'm feeling while I'm feeling it. I may know something is wrong. My body knows, my shoulders know, my stomach knows, my jaw knows, my tone definitely knows. But my conscious, logical brain may still be sitting there like, interesting. Why am I suddenly furious? And by the time I do figure it out, I've already said something or done something or reacted to someone who wasn't actually the source. So this pattern becomes even more complicated because I'm trying to identify an emotion that may already be mixed together with anticipation, anxiety, frustration, resentment, sensory overload, exhaustion, relationship tension. It's a whole soup. And nobody asked for soup. Sometimes my body knows before I do. One thing I'm learning is that I may need to stop waiting for the perfect emotional vocabulary. And I really want to wait and procrastinate a busy word to appear like I'm productive type thing. Because sometimes the first clue isn't I'm angry at my husband. It's my neck is tight, my heart is pounding, oh my gosh, my jaw is clenched. I suddenly don't want to hear anybody talk. No noise, quiet. Shh. Simon says be quiet. Everything my children are doing is irritating me right now. I want to get away. I feel like I'm about to explode. And on, and those are data. They're not the whole story, but they are data. And I've started thinking about them less as proof that my children are behaving badly when no one's watching, and more as information that something in me needs attention. That doesn't mean I immediately know what it is. It means I do pause before assigning blame, if at all, which is not what we want to be doing. The question I'm learning to ask, instead of why are my children being so annoying, I'm doing better at asking, what am I actually reacting to right now? And sometimes the answer is they're being loud. Fair enough. Sometimes it's I'm overstimulated. Okay. Sometimes I'm exhausted. Also valid. Sometimes I expected today to go differently. Important right there. Sometimes I'm already anxious about what my husband is going to say. There it is. And sometimes I'm actually angry with my husband. We talked about that in the unofficial, now official part 1 to this part 2 of an episode. There it really is. That question has become useful because it creates a tiny gap between stimulus and story. And that gap is where I get some choice back. My husband isn't necessarily the enemy here either, y'all. I want to be careful with this. This episode isn't about making my husband the villain, your partner the villain, your spouse, the person you're doing life with the villain, because that's way too easy and convenient. Come on. And it's not necessarily accurate either. He's a human being. They are human beings with his own nervous system, expectations, sensitivities, communication patterns, and experiences. Oh, preferences too. He is also sometimes generally a grounding resource for me. Not sometimes. He is always, Ebony. Always. Sometimes I can borrow his nervous system when mine isn't doing a particularly impressive job at the moment. So the goal isn't my husband needs to stop reacting so I can parent correctly. Like, I'm only functioning because of his support, like 85% of the time. The goal is I need to understand what happens inside me when I anticipate his reaction. And we need to build a better way of communicating around those moments. That's a relationship problem. Like I pegged it from the beginning earlier, not a children's behavior problem. And treating the wrong problem won't solve the right one. There's a difference between anticipation and intuition. This is something I'm still learning as well. Sometimes my body knows something before my conscious mind does. That's intuition, because sometimes my body is relaying an old pattern and calling it intuition. That's prediction. I can't read a crystal ball yet. I feel like I need to master that skill before my children become teenagers. But anywho, those can feel remarkably similar. So I've had to become more curious. Instead of, I know exactly what's about to happen, I can ask, is this happening right now? Or am I preparing for something I expect to happen? That one question too can change the entire interaction as well. Because if the thing hasn't happened yet, I don't actually need to respond to it yet. That's my logic. I can wait. Wild concept. Whoa. The human nervous system would like to file a complaint. What I want to do instead, I don't want to become a perfectly regulated mother. I would like to show my children honestly and appropriately, safely, the ranges of the experience of motherhood. And perfectly regulated, I don't think that's realistic. I don't even think it's desirable or cute. I want to become a mother who notices sooner. That's different. I want to notice I'm getting sharper. I'm bracing. I'm anticipating. I'm making this bigger than it actually is. I'm responding to my husband through my children. And right there is where I then want to pause. Maybe I step away. Maybe I lower my voice. Ebony. Maybe I say, hold on, give me a moment, give me my space right now. Maybe I don't answer immediately. Maybe I let my husband handle something instead. Maybe I come back to my children and say, I'm sorry, I was frustrated, my apologies, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. You did not deserve that. Repair matters. I remember mentioning that in the very beginning of the show, not because I want to make mistakes, okay, but because I want my children to experience what accountability actually looks like. Now, the thing I really want to remember, my children are not my husband. They outnumber him. They're not responsible for my relationship with him. They are not responsible for my anxiety about him. They're not responsible for managing his nervous system. And they're certainly not responsible for absorbing emotions that belong somewhere else. When I feel that ugly green goblin coming online, I want to get curious before I get corrective. What am I actually angry about? Because sometimes the answer isn't my child. Sometimes the answer is I'm scared of what may happen next. Sometimes I'm exhausted. Sometimes I feel unsupported. Sometimes I feel misunderstood. Sometimes I haven't processed something with my husband. And sometimes, maybe most importantly, I don't actually know yet. That's that alexithymia piece I experience. And that's okay too. I don't have to know immediately. I can pause without having the answer. I can create space before I create. Damn it. The tiny experiment. So here's what I'm practicing. The next time I feel that immediate surge of, stop it, why are you doing that? I cannot deal with you right now. I'm going to ask myself one question. If my husband were not part of this equation, how would I actually feel about what my child is doing? This is a tiny experiment for all of us right now. Not what should I feel, not what would a good mother feel, just what do I actually feel? Maybe I'm annoyed, maybe I'm amused, maybe I genuinely don't care. Maybe I need them to stop because I'm overstimulated. Maybe I need help, maybe I need space, and then I can deal with that instead of reacting to an imaginary conversation with my husband through my children. I think this is one of those places where understanding my neurodivergence has given me a strange kind of mercy. Not permission to behave badly, mercy to investigate what is actually happening. Because sometimes the behavior is the final link in a much longer chain. The child does something, I anticipate my husband's reaction, my nervous system braces, my emotions accelerate, my alexithymia makes the actual feeling harder to identify, and then my child gets the reaction. That's the chain. And now that I can see it, I can start breaking it somewhere earlier. Maybe I don't have to wait until I'm already the green goblin. Maybe I can catch myself at the anticipation. Maybe I can say, wait, I'm not actually angry at my child right now. And maybe that tiny realization is enough to change what happens next, because my child deserves my honest response, not the emotional residue of a conversation I haven't even had yet. And honestly, so do I. So if you've learned anything here today, mamas, you're not failing because you discovered another complicated layer of your nervous system. You're learning where the emotion actually lives. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do for our children is become curious about what we're carrying before we hand it to them. So munch on that as food for thought for a little while, and I will talk to you in the next one, mama.